I'm going to give a bit of a project context. I'm going to look at the problems that we face. I'm going to look at some of the previous approaches and our need to prepare to change and the progress we've made to date. And then finally, like all good letters, there will be a postscript. Nobody needs introduction to the Northern Cape, but this is a presentation I gave more broadly. It's the least populated province in South Africa, and that brings a whole complex ways of dealing with problems of this nature. Yet it supposedly has the biggest sheep population in the country, although I was speaking to farmers over tea, and they were saying actually the sheep numbers have dropped quite dramatically, so buy your half sheep on the way home because the prices are going to go up shortly, I would imagine. Also, there are a large number of farming units in the Northern Cape, over 5,000, and the average farm size is pretty large. So we are dealing with large farms spread over a large landscape with very few people in that landscape, and the possibility of 6 million hectares of Prosopis in that landscape. This gives an indication of the problem of Prosopis. It was introduced in the 1800s as a wonder plant, and it has spread over nearly all the provinces of South Africa, except for the eastern seaboard provinces, and is particularly bad in the Northern Cape. Early estimates was that we had 1.8 million hectares. That was taken in about 2007, but spreading it up to 8% per annum, estimated that we could easily have up to 8 million hectares of Prosopis in the province already. The big problem with Prosopis, as we know, it has very long root systems. The longest recorded root system, it was 70 meters deep, and this has a problem for the availability of groundwater in this water-stressed province. Not only does it have a long taproot which can access groundwater, but it has the long lateral roots that grow across the surface and can extract groundwater or surface water when it's available. This in comparison to indigenous vegetation, acacias, or former acacias, vachelias are common thorn trees in this area, which can have a root system that goes down 15 to 20 meters. The other big problem is, because it's an invasive plant, it produces a lot of, well, not because it's an invasive plant, it's invasive because it produces a lot of seeds, which aren't predated in any shape or form, and it can form really dense stands of plants, as we saw in Nico's slides, and can use up to 6 times more water than a naturally vegetated landscape which has your thorn trees in it. There's been a lot of research done on Prosopis over the years, and we've got knowledge of all the water impacts as well as its impacts on biodiversity and grazing availability. So an enclosed coppice or dense stand of Prosopis can eliminate your grass and therefore reduce your carrying capacity for cattle and sheep. Just a roadmap to management for Prosopis. You're not going to be able to see the details of this, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to get access to the presentation at another stage. Where's the pointer? Anyway, if we look at the far left, 1880, the first seeds were imported into the country, and above that, between 1897 to 1918, there are records of how many kilograms worth of seeds were imported by the then Departments of Forestry for Transvaal and the Cape Province. Important dates to look at in terms of our engagement with farmers. In 1987, Graham Harding, who who's one of the experts on herbicide management of Prosopis, did a farmer survey, and in that farmer survey there were some 50% of the farmers wanted eradication of Prosopis. Why we didn't at that stage act and implement further biological control or more damaging biological control is of concern, but there was this perception that farmers used the pods for drought sustenance and for supplementing fodder for plant for their sheep. And then, in 2001 there was another stakeholder meeting held by farmers and researchers, and at that meeting there was discussion around more damaging biological control agents. And then if you carry on this timeline further on, 2019 we still had another stakeholder meeting with farmers, and at that stage we didn't have a biological control agent that was more damaging on Prosopis. Part of the research that has been undertaken by researchers was looking at a better and more effective management plan for Prosopis. And they looked at 4 different scenarios. Again, this is not very clear, but the top scenario is business as usual. The axes of the graph on the left-hand side, it's low cost and low density or distribution of Prosopis, and the bottom axis is time. So over time, with increased invasion, you get increased cost, what we're looking at is what can reduce the cost and the extent of invasion. So if we carry on with the current trajectory, we'll just get an increased invasion and an increased cost of management. The second line down talks to if we only did a biological control of the plant, slightly more, if we increased mechanization of management of the species, and the next one down is an increased damaging biological control, and the bottom scenario where we cause a decrease not only in the extent of invasion but the cost of invasion, a cost of managing the plant, is where we introduce both a biological control and more effective mechanical management of the species. But the problem with much of this research is that the researchers have been assessing the farmers' opinions. We have, to all accounts, put the farmer and the stakeholders under the microscope and written what they've done, and we haven't been at the situation where we're actually working with the farmers hand in glove, or as the bottom right illustrates, in a machine that's actually delivering what the researchers suggest and what the agriculturalists, landowners and livestock farmers would like to see. So part of the work that Greta will present after lunch, I assume, if lunch is here, and part of the work that Ivey is presenting will be looking at this community of practice around Prosopis management, where the researchers and the farmers are working in unity and not this coming in every 20 years and having a meeting, going away, doing some research and not integrating our research with your needs. Since 2019, I've worked with Marse, with the late Dani Jacobs, with Willem Symington, to begin to develop the guidelines towards a national program for management of Prosopis. It has faltered. It hasn't gone very far, and possibly because of COVID, possibly because of the lack of understanding of what a management program could help with, in terms of unlocking resources and in terms of delivery of a program to manage Prosopis. And what I've tried to achieve with setting up this national program is for each of the stakeholders, the interested parties, to put what they can deliver onto the table. I set quite clear targets for the biological control community about what they should be doing in terms of research and in terms of applications to release new biological control agents, and then if they had got permission to release those agents, setting targets for the number of agents that they would actually, the number of individual insects that they would release in any given year. And I thought that putting that on the table would encourage other stakeholders to support that and to offer what they can deliver. I was speaking to my colleagues from South African National Parks and have worked with them to get their invasive species eradication control and management plans, and Nicholas Cole from Sand Parks, along with Hendrik Malchus from the Meerkat National Park, have sent me the Prosopis plan for, or the management plan for that park. I think I probably have got the Ofrabi's and Michali's plans. I just need to go back into the emails. That is a commitment from the parks to be managing invasive alien plant species, particularly Prosopis in the parks. We need something similar, and I have been in consultation with Willem and Irvin, who's taken over from Dani Jacobs at Agri-Noordkaap to develop these on-farm, farm-scale management plans. And through a bit of funding that we have received from the National Research Foundation, we have got a master's student, Kreta, who is from the Groblershoop area, and she will speak a little bit about developing plans that are actually meaningful for the farmer, that they're not just a series of lines on a piece of paper, and I'll let her explain that a little bit further. But what I had hoped was that with the 3,500, sorry, I get my zeros wrong all the time, 3,500 members of Agri-Noordkaap, that we could get them each to commit to putting a couple of lines together. This would avoid young Stian knocking on their door with a directive or a compliance or a warning or whatever, but it would also give them something aspirational for the management of invasive Prosopis and other species on their properties. Just in terms of biological control, there's been talk about there not being a biological control. I will talk about where we are with biological control, but the situation is that with biological control, we can never eradicate, we can never eliminate a plant from the environment. That's just not how biological control works. This graph on the top left-hand side is what we currently or could get to in a situation where you have 100% Prosopis in the environment. There will be occasional drops of the numbers of plants as plants die because of drought, or they die because of whatever reason in the environment, so you get a fluctuating in population. If we introduce a biological control that is damaging, sorry, it really doesn't work. Then you get to the situation, let's see if I can do it, I'm going to be out of the square then. So the insects are introduced on the grey line that's going up midway through the graph. We hope that they end up in a reduction. That one. Okay, sorry guys. So we introduce a damaging biological control, and it has an immediate effect on the population of Prosopis, dropping it down to a more manageable level in the environment. So we hope that we get to that situation, but this will only be achieved through integrated management. You would need to have both biological control and farm-based plans which are dealing with the species in the riverine areas, in the flukta, and then the insect drops the population down. Again, you'll have decreases in the number of plants, and with each decrease in the number of plants, you'll get a decrease in the number of insects. These insects that we introduce will only feed on Prosopis and the Prosopis hybrids that we have tested. And then ultimately you want to get to below this threshold where Prosopis is in the environment pretty similarly to your indigenous plants. So that you have, between the Prosopis plants, you have your grazing. That's what we hope to with regards to biological control, but we've talked a lot about ideas around biomass use, and farmers have bandied these ideas about. There's been a charcoal proposal in Van Wyksvlei that's been on the cards for a while. You don't even need to turn the product into charcoal, you just need to dry it out and sell it as a high-value smoking product for smoking of meat. There is research into using Prosopis in activated charcoal. There's research into using Prosopis in energy to heat projects. But all of these take a champion who will take the project forward, and Ivey is going to talk a little bit about his vision for use of Prosopis in fodder production. One of the other off-the-wall ideas is to use Prosopis biomass in construction. We went to the effort of getting the natural environmental engineering solutions to test Prosopis, whether it can be used in construction. The good news is that it can be, but the bad news is that they haven't got any funding to continue the work, and they haven't got any funding to actually put a model construction up, which would show use of Prosopis in a construction like this, which is bulletproof, weatherproof, soundproof, fireproof, anything else proof that you'd like to know. On to the management of Prosopis, and I must thank my colleague there, Kawi, and Karine Kleinjan, Fritz Haystack, and then our international colleagues at New Mexico State University, Dave Thompson, Kristen Bowers, and our Argentinian colleagues at FERDI, Fernando McKay, for working on these slides with Blair. And yeah, the cost of mechanical and chemical control when the invasion has got to the extent that it's got is just too high. And we need a helping hand from insects that can damage the plant, that can cause a real impact on the populations that are spread over the Northern Cape. As pointed out in that early slide, we introduced 3 seed-feeding insects in the late 1980s. One species of Algarobius didn't succeed. Niltumius, this insect over here, is present but not at high numbers. But the Algarobius prosopis is hugely effective in certain environments. It can damage up to 90% of seed, and I think that's the point that was being made in the earlier session. It depends on the environmental conditions how effective the Algarobius can be. Algarobius prosopis will lay eggs on seed and dung, so even if a sheep has or livestock has eaten your pods and defecates viable seed, if in the certain circumstances that insect will target the seed in the dung and will reduce the seed viability before it rains and the prosopis seed that germinates. We have thought about bulking up the numbers of this biological control agent. Researchers are a little bit concerned about the perception that we might create, create a perception that this is the be-all and end-all. And yeah, I wandered around Kimberley, and although there's lots of indigenous plants, there are lots of exotic plants, and I picked up some pods. And normally I would have expected to find at least 1 or 2 exit holes or 1 or 2 eggs in the pods. And there's absolutely nothing in this. I don't know whether that's to do with the timing of year or the fact that it's an urban environment. but on my way back to Uppington tomorrow morning, I'm going to stop at a couple of trees and see whether the pods on the ground have been predated by Algarobius prosopis. And Greta will talk a little bit about her experience of the seed feeding weevils, and also just speak to her over the afternoon tea about that experience. Then, with regards to new biological control agents, I'm sorry this slide was taken from a presentation that was made in May 2021, and so it's a bit out of date. You would have seen in 2001 we had a meeting where we were encouraged to look for more damaging biological control agents, and the Australians have invested heavily in this first species at the top here, EVP. And as you can see, it hasn't actually been given a species name yet. It's known by the word EVP species #1. Before any hashtags were popular, it's been #1, which I think is quite attractive, but it probably screw up people's whatever Twitter accounts, what account deals with a hashtag. And we released, Fritz Hastek did a whole lot of testing on this. We do have Prosopis that's supposedly indigenous to North Africa, and it goes across to the Arabian Peninsula, and we had to test for whether this insect would damage that plant. Accessing the plants, germinating the plants, getting them to maturity took a hell of a lot longer than expected, but Fritz is the meticulous in the research, which one has to be if you're releasing a biological control agent. And after probably nearly a decade of work, he submitted a release application to Department of Agriculture, and Department of Agriculture approved for release in December the year before last, 2020, and in February 2021 we released I think probably about 1,000 of this EVP, firstly at the square kilometre array outside Carnarvon, and then also near Bloemhof Dam. So it's in the environment. Budget restraints have prevented Fritz from travelling further from his base in Roodeplaat, where he has raised, I think, probably about 6,000 of these insects, and he's releasing them in 500 per batch, but he hasn't been able to travel further than a day trip from Gauteng, so we really aren't getting into the big areas of invasion. Corinne Kleinian has worked on the Coeluroscopia gandolfoi, which she talked about in the 2019 workshop, and at that stage, the Department of Agriculture had insisted that it be tested on one further species, which is found between Kennard and Carnarvon on that road. The difficulty with testing was that this insect lays on green pods. The seed and the green pods in Argentina came out at a certain time, but the green plant is on the Xerocladia, which they had to test on, weren't actually available at the same time. So that she was granted permission to, if she could prove that this species didn't lay eggs on the pods of Xerocladia, that she could release immediately. And in, it must have been 2019, 2020, she got the timing right to bring this weevil over, tested on green pods, but didn't have enough to release immediately, even though we could prove that it didn't feed on Xerocladia. So recently, in October, November this year, a consignment of about 900 insects came through. They were kept in quarantine in Wits University, and they've been released, I think it's 6 different sites, and again, due to budget constraints, Korean has not been able to check the veracity of its establishment, but she has found establishment in one or two of the sites that she checked just prior to this meeting. All right. I talked about mass rearing of and redistribution of the Algarobius. The Ivey goes into diapause, so it goes into a rest period for most of winter. And it is resting, probably starting now as the temperatures are starting to cool. And one of the ideas is that we could break that diapause by growing it in enclosed environmental controlled conditions. So over the last year, I've been working with the Association of and for People with Disabilities in Uppington to set up a mass rearing facility. Here they're actually making boxes for cactus biocontrol. But the idea is that we will have Prosopis plants in cages, and we will switch on the lights and raise the temperature prior to the spring season, bulking up the numbers of Ivey that we can then release into the environment. And we can release Ivey 3 or 4 times a year during the spring and summer. And we hope that we will be able to bulk up the numbers to get to about 12,000 insects per season, and if it's feasible, even further. And this will provide work for people who are in wheelchairs, people who have a limited mobility, as we've proven can be done with water hyacinth biocontrol agents and waterweed biocontrol agents. So the idea is that they will prune Ivey-infected stems, which will then go out either in containers like this or in polystyrene containers, which can then just be put directly onto the trees, from where they will spread into Prosopis environments. There was one limitation with Ivey is that it's quite temperature sensitive. It's been very successful in its use in the northern territories of Australia, where you've got the ameliorating effect of the ocean nearby. Without that, in parts of the Northern Cape where you get frosts, we anticipate that the numbers might die down every winter. But with microclimates where there's low frost, and those do exist, probably even in urban environments where there is low frost due to human activity, we will anticipate that the species will be able to overwinter. But the reason why we're going for mass rearing is to circumvent that decrease every winter. Yeah, we are really taking to heart the call from the farmers to introduce something more damaging. I'm sorry that it's taken since 1987 to really activate that, but there are a number of reasons which really aren't that excusable, but maybe are understandable. So again, with budget constraints and COVID, we would normally send a South African researcher to work in partnership with an overseas collaborator. We haven't been able to do that because there's been no international travel for the last 2 years, particularly for any students working at the Center for Biological Control. So we've set up a direct collaboration with New Mexico State University. It's a lot more expensive to employ a postdoctoral fellow that's being paid US dollars, but it's the only way that we could do it under the current regime. Kristen has spent the whole of last summer, which would have been June, July in New Mexico, and she's come up with a long list of potential agents that are looking possible in terms of biological control of Prosopis. If you understand biological control, the idea is to first find something that is damaging, so that will impact the target plant. The second thing is to make sure that it only targets the target plant. I believe that up to 70% of insects are monophagous. Unlike polyphagous shot-hole borer, they will only eat on one species. So we're looking for that, or for an insect that will target the range of Prosopis, particularly the groups that are invasive. And these are some of the species that we are interested in, which will look at damaging the bark of Prosopis. They will bore into the nodes. And a little bit more difficult to study is something that lays its eggs and that then eat on the roots, just because of the complexities of studying something underground. We've had a long relationship with Ivey in Argentina, and and collaboration with them. They are very excited about this little wasp, which has the potential to ball Prosopis. So it'll lay its eggs, and the plant response is to put out this galling, which then damages the flow of nutrients to and from the leaves and causes damage to the plant. Again, we haven't been able to get out into the field, but our collaborators, when they collected the little green podlet weevil, they started looking for this Escatoceras genus, looking for damaging agents that would focus on Prosopis. Okay, can I stop it there and have any questions around Prosopis biocontrol before I get into the postscript, if that's all right? I know it's lunchtime, and I know I've...
You hope. We're in the Northern Cape. We have no suggestions that somebody who's providing lunch has arrived at all.
Okay, well then we might just have to keep going. I'll have to feed you with my...
Sorry, Philip, I see you did releases, and I don't have those releases on the national release database, so can you please send that information through?
Yeah, I'll speak to the researchers concerned. They should know the protocol with regards to that. I think the releases with regards to Fritz, I'll take that up with them. Yeah, sure.
Questions regarding Prosopis before we get on to cacti?
Okay, I think the important thing is that these biological control agents will have an impact, but we are at such a high spread and high density of the plant. It is not going to have that dramatic impact immediately. And the call from all biological controllers is don't have high expectations to start with and be patient. But that said, the only species in South Africa that have actually been effectively managed have been the species that have had a degree of biological control on them. So the Acacia longifolia, Acacia cyclops, Acacia saligna in the Western Cape, they were at dense stands of those species all across the Western Cape. And if it hadn't been for the biological control agents, the working for water teams, the private landowners would not have been able to get on top of the problem. Likewise with the cactus, which I'll show you now. Yeah, cactus has various uses, but like the slide that Kay showed, where you had the copy in the background with prickly pear as far as the eye could see in the foreground. Farmers left for the war, the Second World War, thinking they would come back to farms that were covered in cactus. If it hadn't been for the biological control agents, they would have come back to exactly that situation. But they came back to farms that were relatively open, and they were able to re-establish herds of livestock in that environment. We have to be patient with these biological control agents. We have to nurture them, and a lot more of the thinking of biological control researchers is to bulk up the numbers and distribute them. And you'll see why we have to do that for cactus biological control as well. The weevils, and to an extent the moth, are quite mobile and should be able to spread, and because the Prosopis spread is quite continuous and contiguous, the insects should be able to spread from one population to another. Nog vraag? Vraag in Afrikaans, ek kan Afrikaans verstaan. All right, I've convinced everybody.
There's a question. 2.
Afternoon, Kalamufuno from South African National Park. Actually, my question is based on the release you made in SKA. I believe it's also part of Meerkat. So,
Yeah.
my question is based on, just because I'm going to do the density estimation. We fly in Meerkat, I think it was last year, the aerial sensor, whereby the density of Prosopis is very high. So before that was now we start with the tip of waiting for water, whereby they are gliding as well. So when I do estimate of the cover, if I want to check on the effect of the biological method which is already released, which means it's more to the leaves and the bark. So my other question it will be, does it kill the plants totally, or it's only affect a certain part of the plants?
All right, the release in the square kilometre array, we haven't been able to go back to monitor whether the plant has established, but Hendrik Malchus, the reserve manager, went there and took some photographs for us. It isn't very clear whether the moth has actually established. We have permission from Sandparks to continue researching and to do further releases. I think we've got a 3-year research agreement with Sandparks. Unfortunately, again, I will say due to budget restrictions, Fritz hasn't been able to get back to check the monitoring. Again, it's be patient. This will defoliate smaller plants completely and ultimately defoliate larger plants. So you will see your next aerial survey, you will have to come up with a metric that picks up plants with damaged leaves or plants which are no longer showing the same signature as a fully leaved plant. So yes, that's how it will start to change. Elder van der Berg, who's done a lot of remote sensing of Prosopis, suggested that we should give her the release sites for the Coeluroscapulapion gandolfoi, the little podlet weevil, and then I reminded her that she won't see any effect because all that is targeting is the green seed. Unlike the 3 previous ones, it's targeting green seeds where the 3 previous were targeting dry seed. So you won't be able to see any change in the population structure because it is only reducing the fecundity of the plant, the number of seeds that it produces. So yeah, I think, speak to Elder and speak to Janu Barnard, who's just finished his MSc on near remote sensing of Prosopis. And if you're needing further advice, Greta has been advised to work with a chap called Dave Kinsler, who's done a lot of the near remote sensing of the water hyacinth on Hartbeespoort Dam. So there's lots of facilities at your disposal and people who are willing to help. I just don't know how you're going to get that aerial photography in the square kilometre array because I'm pretty certain you won't be able to fly something over that's taking photographs. But yeah.
Actually, the plan now is to go and do actual monitoring, data collection on the Prosopis on the ground.
Okay.
So to look at the density within the different areas.
So can I recommend before your first visit is that we arrange for Fritz to come down. We are hopeful that money will come through shortly, and we will then arrange for Fritz to come down with you, and he will be able to show you exactly what to look for. The leaf tying moth has a very specific habit and will be visible to him, and he'll be able to train you as to what to look for. Again, that species flies, so it will start moving around the reserve, but it will favor microclimates in the reserve that don't have as high a frost level as other parts of the reserve. Was there a question over there, or, yeah?
Thanks for the talk, Philip. Yeah, just a comment and a recommendation. I'll be surprised that this weevil and the wasp are not working here. So I suggest that probably you can put money and effort in the physiology and role of geology of the environment, because it's likely to be the one that influences the performance and interaction of the two factors or the two species that are interacting. I'm saying this because in the Western Cape back in the days, I was part of the study that was evaluating the release of almost the same weevil by the different species, and the wasp on Acacia cyclops. And it was released in 1992, and in 2012, when I worked for University of Cape Town, I was able to do that assessment to quantify performance and change over that long time. It was then we could find the suppression of seed production. The populations were still the same. Here I'm saying, I'm emphasizing your point that people should be patient. It can take about 20 years for you to realize the impact of the biological control on the system, especially the one that is so much infested like this one in the Northern Cape.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but remember the work on both Cyclops, Mearnsii, Longifolia followed very much traditional biological control, a classical biological control where they made a couple of releases and then they left the insect to their own devices. The Militaris weevil on Acacia cyclops has exceeded beyond all expectations. We don't know, and that's the reason why biological controllers are very anxious not to raise expectations of the audience. We don't know how the strain of insect that we brought in is going to survive or thrive in its new environment. But rest assured, if it doesn't take off, we will continue researching and finding the more effective agents. And already Fritz has had discussions about the VP which we brought from Australia, whether we should be going back to the original source and looking for some degree of climate matching, some degree of plant matching to maybe find a more effective VP if this one is less so. If you've done any life sciences or any crop sciences, you'll know about inbreeding depression. We've had these insects in captivity for quite a while. They haven't had too many options of who they breed with. So there might be problems of that, but all of those will be addressed. We might get lucky and it might just spread like wildfire, but there is an element of chance, and that's all we ask from you as an audience is give us the chance, and we will do our best to make sure it is as most effective as it can be. All right, any further questions about Prosopis? All right, I mean, just a final word. If there's anybody here who's got deep pockets, and I know they're not, we had a bit of a crisis with our mass rearing facility in Uppington. There was a very high wind that came from the very wrong direction, and it flattened our glass house. Insurance is paying for the glass house, but we are needing a couple of $100,000 to get it back to full operation. So if any of you got a checkbook with a small check for us, please contact me over lunch, or not over lunch as the case may be. This is the postscript, so it should be short. I think it was Nico put up a picture of boxing glove cactus, Cylindroputia fulgida mammillata, and Putia fulgida, we have a biological control agent because it was very invasive. Putia fulgida up in the borders of the Kruger National Park, and there was a thought, well, let's try the Dactylopus on this species, which is quite invasive in the Northern Cape. We had tried chemical control on this species, and we had got taken to court as a result of using a herbicide which volatilized and destroyed a vineyard. And Debbie's right, there is environmental harm that's caused by certain herbicides, and there is the danger of the volatilization, the gasification of herbicides, which can cause human health damage, but also crop damage. We did get a little bit suspicious about the vineyard getting killed a second time in such a uniform fashion, and I don't think our insurers were too happy to pay the second time round. We introduced this biological control, the Dactylopus, onto the boxing glove cactus, and you can see it working its way. There's still a fair bit of new growth, but you can certainly see that the plant is stressed and dying. And then a couple of months or half a year later, the same fence line, not taken from the perfect angle, the same mountain and housing in the background, and the cactus is completely dead. There is a really good video that Trevor put together on this biological control project. The Northern Cape farmer who was interviewed talked about working for water, spending a huge amount of money on herbicide treatment on an invasion similar to this, and the net result of using the herbicide was that none of his grazing vegetation had come back. And although they had killed the plant quite quickly, they had killed most everything else, because when you're spraying herbicide onto a cactus, it's very difficult to avoid anything else beneath it. This cactus will fall to the ground. The spines that are so damaging to livestock and to humans and to car tires become completely ineffective, and you can walk onto that, and cattle and sheep can graze that area quite soon afterwards. And you can see in that picture the grasses are starting to come up without any effect of a herbicide. Just the cactus invasion by numbers, it's important to know that we haven't got a single Opuntia species that is indigenous to South Africa. All our succulents, all our rich diversity of euphorbias, aloes, speckworm, the hyoworthias, the stone plants are not cactus. They are succulents, but they're not even in the Cactaceae family. They're in a whole range of other families that they belong to. Yet, because cactus are attractive and they do give some big, beautiful flowers, unlike many of our succulents, apart from the aloes, they are attractive to people who grow them in their gardens and use them for various other purposes. And their spines are very much more damaging to people and animals, and they can be used for effective fencing. And then, of course, they produce some very good fruits. We saw the dragon fruit, and the Turk's Bay produces a very nice and edible fruit. 35 of the 400 cactus species introduced into this country are listed as invasive. Anna Naboa and her team did a lot of research into what makes cactus invasive, and if people are interested, I can send you that work. And it is mainly some of the columnar cactus, it's mainly the Opuntia cactus, and mainly the Cylindropuntia cactus. So we know where we need to target our attention in terms of managing invasive cactus. We've had over 100 years of biological control of cactus. The first deliberate introduction of a biological control into this country happened in 1913 after an act was passed in Parliament, and Opuntia monacantha is now virtually no longer a threat to farming activities in the Eastern Cape and in this country. So as I pointed out earlier, of the 35 cactus species that are listed invasive, we have 15 cactus species targeted for biological control, and many of those are effectively controlled by biological control alone. In certain situations, the biological control will only take out the top cladodes, and one will have to go in and mechanically clear the bad stuff. And there are certain situations where you want to remove the cactus completely, and in that situation, the balance between herbicide and mechanical and biological control is suggested. It just needs to be part of a plan. Use the biological control to get the numbers right down. Use mechanical control, which might just be collecting all the cladodes. We had a species, Opuntia salmiana, which was an eradication target, and there were only 3 known populations in an area outside Brits, was it? My Sandy colleagues left outside Brits. And we went in, herbicide treated the adults, and then we had community members gathering buckets of cladodes. So all the little cladodes fall off, and each of those could produce another plant, and they were paid per bucket. They weren't paid per day. So eventually we had to start paying them more per bucket, but that meant that their research effort was going better, and we got to a point where no more buckets were being collected, and we could declare that the plant had been effectively removed from that area, but we have to continue ongoing monitoring of that area. In that situation, we wouldn't invest in a biological control program because the population was so small. And just in terms of cost-benefit analysis, if you were to let your felt get as infected with cactus as that earlier picture, and you lost the ability to graze your sheep and livestock as a result of that invasion, and we were to invest in biological control, for every rand we spent on biological control research and implementation, you would get a return of 700 rand or more from that effort. So this is not a one-way street. I'm not just here to give information to you. We need information from you. We have biological control agents for Opuntia stricta. It's probably not so much of a problem in much of this area. It's very much a problem up towards the Kruger National Park. And we need information on imbricate cactus, Cylindra Opuntia imbricata. Just the 2 growth forms to point out to you. The flatter cladodes, which are essentially modified stems of the Opuntia species, the Opuntia genus at least, and then the Cylindra Opuntia, shaped like the cylinder, and then each of these little cladodes can fall off and form a new plant. Likewise, each of these cladodes, even the fruit could fall off and form a new plant without germinating seed. We need information on these species and any other cactus invasion that you've got. So what do we need as researchers? Just in the Northern Cape, and this data is probably a little bit outdated, we took it from Southern African Plant Invader Atlas, looking at the 2, 4, 6 Cylindra Opuntia. Actually, there's one that's not a Cylindra Opuntia species, the top species, that are recorded in the Northern Cape. And you will see that all of these records are along the roads. And we have the imbricate cactus is this blue dot. We have 78 records of imbricate cactus in the Northern Cape. The reason I say they're all along the roads is This is a roadside survey. Most are collected by a single person, Leslie Henderson. We have absolutely no idea what is happening in these wide open spaces. And those wide open spaces, there's likely to be a farmstead, there's likely to be a farm, and we can't legally get to those farms, although I think one of the government officials said they could arrive and do an inspection. We're researchers, we can't just arrive on your farm and do an inspection. But you can and should take a photograph for us and send it to us directly, preferably GPS located so that we know where you are. Even more preferably, I'm going to do a punt for iNaturalist, very easy application to use, and put it onto that and WhatsApp it to me. There's the last number you're going to get on the numbers for Cactus. And we will get it identified for you, and we will, if possible, it would be useful if you could see whether there is any white, fluffy, wax-like structure on the plant. Photograph that for us as well, because it's likely to be the biological control. Send it through to us, and we will identify it for you. If we have a biological control agent for that plant, we will liaise with you on how best to get that to you. It's very easy for us to move biological control around the country, because all you do is you take an infected cladode and you put it in the post, or in most cases put it in a courier, and it will get to you. You need to take a pair of brytongs and stick it into the population underneath the shade of the existing cladodes. I think that's it. We don't only want records of imbricate cactus, so any cactus that you've got, take a photograph of it. We are only interested in the 35 listed invasive cactus. iNaturalist would obviously be interested in any cactus. So spend a bit of time in your Tully's rockery, in your Miles rockery, take the photographs, send them through. Maybe we can get Uppington or Kimberley up to the top city in the biobits on iNaturalist, hopefully not just because of cactus diversity. All right, any questions around, just again to add that the biocontrol on cactus is unbelievably well researched. We have biological control agents that target individual species and no other species of cactus. They do not spread onto our indigenous succulents. The females put their mouth parts into the cladode, they don't move for the rest of their lives. That doesn't mean that they couldn't be non-host specific, but they will only put their mouth parts into the cactus on which they have evolved to feed on. Debbie, I see you got a question.
Sorry, Philip, it's not a question, it's a comment. It's everybody, please don't spread Dactylopius from one species to another. If the Dactylopius is on a Puntia stricta, move it from a Puntia stricta to a Puntia stricta. Just because it looks like washing powder and it's on a Puntia stricta, don't put it on a Puntia fulgida, for instance, because it's different hybrids of a Dactylopius species. So, yes, so please don't move them indiscriminately. Move them from the same species to the same species. Don't just move them indiscriminately from one cactus to another cactus, or one Opuntia species to the other. So please just keep that in mind. And also with regards to the herbicide control, it's not just the herbicide, it's the correct herbicide. If you use the correct herbicide, it will work. If you use the incorrect herbicide, it won't work. And also please keep in mind, you cannot use an unregistered herbicide to control any species. So please keep in mind, the herbicide you use has to be registered under Act 36 of 1947 when you apply it onto a plant. So don't just pick a herbicide and go spray it on a species. It has to be registered under Act 36 for that species and also for the application that you're using. So if it's not registered for a foliar application, you cannot use it for a foliar application, etc. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks Debbie for that. I would recommend that rather than moving Dactylopus around, is do firstly check with the team at the Centre for Biological Control and
Conflict of forestry fisheries and environment, as it is their mandate.
yeah, okay. And yeah, just one other thing, there are questions about whether the Dactylopus will affect the spinous form of prickly pear and or Turksvay, the edible form. There is a biological control that does affect that. We wouldn't be able to have livestock farming in the Little Karoo, the Craft area if there wasn't one. But you will find if you travel down to parts of the Eastern Cape, there are what we are now terming orchards of prickly pear, and those are where rainfall happens intermittently and washes the biological control off. So if you've got a favoured prickly pear in your garden and you like the fruit, all you need to do is, if you get that white infection on your leaves, is to wash it off with soapy water. And the soapy water will both remove the waxy layer and will damage the insects. So, but you must check throughout the year so that you don't get to the point where that Dactylopus is spread all over. Any further questions about the biological control of cactus? Just to say that we have the Prosopis rearing facility at Uppington will also be rearing biological control for the cactus that we know are in this area, and that will enable us to rear biological control in our other Uitenhage or Kariga facility, which we aren't able to rear for the risk of them hybridizing with each other in the captive facility. So yeah, watch that space. As soon as we've got the tunnel up and running, we've got the boxes made, we will probably have an open day where we'll get people to bring cactus in and use that as a method of advertising the opening of the facility. Yeah.
Okay, Philip, we have both you Stricta and Imbricata all over Kimberley. There's a lot on the airport property as well as the surrounding area. The military base are infested with this stuff. Also things like boxing glove. But what I want to find out, because this for me in our Kimberley area is getting the bigger of the problems, is how far the biological control on Engelmani.
Oh, you asked a big question there. Engelmani we've struggled with because firstly we had to sort out the genetics of the species. We've had a lot of attention paid to that. So Ian Patterson and, I'm going to go blank on the other name. He and his colleague went over to the US, and they did a transect from the east coast right the way to the west coast, hugging most of the boundary of Mexico, looking for Engelmani right across that area. And they brought back Dactylopus from every single population that they visited of Engelmani, and they brought them back into captivity here, the quarantine facility at Wits University, with support from CABI in Kenya, where they've got a problem with Engelmani. We have done a lot of the testing for the most effective biological control agent, but in that research it turned out that the Engelmani that we've got in the Eastern Cape and the Free State might not be Engelmani only, and so there was a lot of genetic work done on the cactus, and I'm not going to remember the name, but one of the forms that we've got of Engelmani, and it's either the Eastern Cape or the Free State form, is not Engelmani, it's a different name. That's good for us because we now know that the Engelmani that we're targeting is Engelmani, and the Engelmani that we're not targeting will have to find a different biological control agent. We've had some really wonderful support from Red Meat Research and Development to look for a biological control for Sylinderpuntia pallida. Firstly they paid for a literature survey on that, and they paid for 3 years worth of research, generously supported that. So we are almost there with pallida, but we haven't got budget to work extensively on the new form or the new species of the species that we've identified in Engelmani. I spoke to Ian Patterson about the torch cactus. Again, we haven't got budget to deal with that. It would form part of our research program. He said they've got a number of favorable agents for that, but they're not as damaging as we would like them to be. So he talked about working with the Namibians who seem to have an agent which was inadvertently introduced. So there might be the possibility of using that. So there's lots of scope. The Engelmani, they have got some very damaging agents. I'm not certain whether they've applied for them. In fact, I know they haven't applied for release applications of those. I'll follow up with him, and if you just drop me an email, you saw my mobile number, I'll get you that information quite quickly. Yeah.